Firing squad. All right, we're going to get into something crazy. Let's get into this. First things first, welcome to CNN. I'm your host, the underdog Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. All right. On this channel, we take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. All right. I have no idea how my accent sounded. Y'all let me know. All right. Let's get into this thing. All right. We're not talking about the culture today. We're not talking about all this other stuff. We're going to talk about you, and me and all that. All right. Let's get into this. In my, obviously, for those of you that know, I'm a pastor of the church. I'm a pastor by day, dope lyricist by night, dropping a new album in a month or two, all that, right? But there's a document that I created. Well, let me back up before I say that. I've noticed in my 17 years as a pastor at my church, and I'm largely to blame for this because in many ways I set the teaching and the emphasis in the church in many ways. I'm one of those main people that do that. I've noticed that there is, especially like when it comes to marriage, there is an absence of the concept of spiritual warfare, right? As a believer, I don't care if you're a cessationist, if you're a charismatic, if you're the frozen chosen, it doesn't matter. Like, spiritual warfare is a biblical category. And the one thing that I've been helping a lot of couples, or everybody do, but in most of our interpersonal relationships, you know, when Jesus, he dumbed down the whole law to love God and love your neighbor as yourself, right? So the enemy is going to tempt us in those two things. And most of the commands that are in the Bible are typically largely towards other people, loving your neighbor as yourself. That's why First John 4 says if you don't love your neighbor whom you have seen, then you can't love God whom you haven't seen, right? So the concept of spiritual warfare has been largely, for many people, reduced to the wild Pentecostals and charismatics where everything is the devil. But the Bible doesn't present the narrative that way. And so in my church, I created a document for just people and then a couples edition called If You Were Satan, How Would You Tempt You? And the reason why I did this was because I realized in like a lot of the counseling I did, even in my own marriage at times, that there was a lot of your spouse feels like your enemy or other people, even if it's not your spouse. When you're in conflict with someone, they're the enemy, right? Especially in like a relationship, a close relationship like marriage, or between your parents or your siblings, or between co-workers that you're close to. There's a dynamic there that it feels like they're the enemy. You're upset, right? And so I wanted people in my church to realize that, like, hey, most of the time your enemy is the enemy of our souls, not the person that you think is your enemy, whoever's disagreeing with you or sitting against you in a moment. So I created this document called If You Were Satan, How Would You Tempt You? And the whole purpose of this is to help believers give real thought to it, because many of us relate to our lives like we just keep getting sucker punched by temptation, when it's very like if we took some time and thought about, all right, what are some of the struggles I have? How does the enemy exploit the past? So when you're married, what I try to do is help the couple see that the enemy exploits both of your past traumas, your histories, whatever it is, your personalities. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert. He exploits all of those things in an effort to get you to think your spouse is your enemy when you're in conflict. And and I think believers sometimes are surprised, as if sometimes it's like, man, did you think that when you became a believer that God was going to protect you from that? Like, no, we become public enemy number one to the enemy because the church are the people that he wants. He already has the world, right? So in this document, now just to show that this is a real document, I tried to pull this up so that you guys could see this, but like it won't let me do it. It won't let me pull it up. So this is all it will let me do is show you this. So I'm showing you this is a real document, but I can't make it any bigger so that you can see this, all right? But this document is called If You Were Satan, How Would You... So this is the couples edition. I'm going to go through this with you. If you were Satan, how would you attack your marriage? So the scriptures we start with are just 1 Corinthians 2:11, where Paul writes, so that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his schemes, right? And then we go to James 4. What causes quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and obtain and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel, right? So this is a real big one for when you have conflict with someone else, right? And then the heavyweight is Ephesians 6:10-13. Where it says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. So listen to that. This is post-resurrection theology. It's saying that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. So the devil has schemes against you as your believer. For we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against the rulers. These are all like demonic hierarchy. Rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. Think about that. It's post-resurrection theology, post-ascension theology. Jesus says it is finished. Jesus overthrew the enemy. He's ascended into heaven, and it's described as a present darkness, right? Against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, right? So what I wanted to do is with the couples and with people in my church is remember the real enemy, right? And so in this document that you're only seeing a sliver of, to the left of me, if you're watching on the screen, it's to the right of me, but it's to the left of me, probably to you. There is these 5 categories where the enemy tempts. And so the enemy exploits individual vulnerabilities to create division. So in each category, there's like step 1, reflect on your personal weakness in your marriage, right? This is what a lot of people don't want to deal with. Everyone thinks I'm marrying my best friend and I'm marrying a person. No one thinks, oh, I'm bringing my sin issues into this relationship. I'm bringing my idiosyncrasies, my weaknesses, my habits, my sinful, all that stuff comes into whatever relationship you're in, right? And so what I wanted to do was say, listen, a lot of the conflict that people have is exploited by the enemy. And a lot of it makes you think that your spouse is the problem. So when we go back to James 4, right? Here's God's perspective on every conflict you've ever had. If you ever want to know whether you're married or you have a roommate, a coworker, whatever, every interpersonal conflict you have with someone else, this is always what's happening to you. Here's what God says, James 4. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you, right? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Listen to what God is saying. When you're in conflict with someone, this is what I teach everyone at my church, especially the couples, everyone this. When you're in a conflict and you're angry and you're upset, and say you start arguing, or maybe you don't yell, but you withdraw, all those things, right? What's happening? God's perspective is, what's causing quarrels and what's causing fights among you? This is James 4. Is it not this? Your passions are at war. So here's what's happening. There's something that you want. There's a passion that you have, right? You desire or do not have, so you murder. There's something that you want, something that you desire that you're not getting from your spouse, and you get into conflict. This is what God says all conflict is. It's not, how we say, you make me so angry. When you stand before God, he's going to say, no, he didn't. What you wanted was respect. What you wanted was to be heard or understood. What you wanted was empathy. And when you didn't get it, you sinned, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Many of the things that we want, there's nothing wrong with it. I want to be treated with respect and all of that. But when I sin against the Lord to get it, then I want it more than I want to please God, and it becomes an idol. This is the reality, right? So God's perspective is every conflict you're in, when you sin, not when someone sins against you, it's possible not, when you sin, your passions are at war with you, right? This is what happens. But when you think about it, you think, man, they make me so angry. If you hadn't have said this, that hurt my feelings, 100%. But we don't have to sin back because people sin against us. So this is the God's perspective. When you have conflict, quarrels and fights, you covet, you want something, but you can't obtain it, so you quarrel. That's the real issue. So I teach couples, and I do this with myself. I started with myself teaching these things. When I'm in conflict, when I'm upset, even when I sin against like my kids, I use James 4 to ask them for forgiveness. I'm like, hey, boys, I need to ask you for forgiveness. I was angry at you guys. I was irritated because I wanted, and I'll explain whatever it was. And then I'll say, I wanted this more than I wanted to please God. And I didn't, I dishonored you and I dishonored the Lord and so forth. I use the language of James 4. And here's what it does. Here's what's the beautiful thing about it. When you do that, it takes away the burden of the other person thinking it's their fault. This is what people forget all the time. The gospel, Jesus came to resolve conflict. He came to resolve a big conflict between God and humanity. And if we think about the bride, then Jesus came to resolve conflict in marriage because we're the bride, right? So Jesus resolves conflict by taking the penalty for us. So the gospel, you have to resolve conflict. You have to bring the gospel to bear in your marriage. And so one way you do that is you take the ownership, right? You take responsibility for what you did in the same way Jesus take responsibility for what we did. He didn't sin, but we did. He took that responsibility. We take it. So this passage in James 4 helps us not let the enemy tempt us to think it's their fault. They're the reasons why. They're the reasons why. No, God says what causes quarrels and fights? You want something, you didn't get it, so you're upset. So what I did was I created this document called If You Were Satan, How Would You Tempt You? And I have step 1, it's called Reflect on Your Personal Weaknesses in Marriage. And I put the enemy exploits, this is right here on the screen, this long document. The enemy exploits individual vulnerabilities to create division. So here are the questions. I'm not going to read every question, but here are some of the questions that I have couples think through. And this can be done individually because I'm giving you the couples edition because I'm just sending them to give you the couples edition. All right, here's what I do. I told them, here's the first question. What personal struggles, e.g. pride, insecurity, and patience, do I bring into the marriage? Like, what did I come into the marriage with? Because Satan will exploit that. Next question. Am I more focused on my spouse's flaws than my own? Why? Like, why? And this is, and we're don't get it twisted. We're wired this way. In Genesis 3, we inherit 3 things from Adam and Eve very clearly. Independence. We see that initially when they make their own clothes. Fear, when they're hiding from God, their fear, what's going to happen. And then blame. It was a woman you gave. It was the serpent. He deceived me. Blame is one, we inherited that from Adam and Eve. Blame is 100% what happens all the time. This is why we always think someone else made us sin. You did this. You make me so angry. This is what we always do, right? So when I'm focusing on my spouse's flaws more, it's because I'm programmed to blame. It's hard to, this is what I love about, remember when Jesus said, he said, one of you will betray me. This is a beautiful scene. Jesus says, one of you will betray me, right? And in the modern era, all of us would be like, I bet it was Judas because he was acting real funny with the money anyway. I bet it was, that's how we think in the modern era, right? But in Jesus's day, and the disciples were like, is it I, Lord? Is it me? They were worried about self. This is the biblical model. What am I doing? How am I contributing? So if you're always focused on your flaw, your spouse, excuse me, I just bit my tongue, your spouse or other people's flaws, you have to ask yourself why. And then here's another question I ask. How do I react when I feel hurt, misunderstood, or unloved? Do I lash out, withdraw, or blame? Dun, dun, dun. Because the enemy uses that, right? So those are a couple questions in step 1. Step 2, examine how the enemy targets your marriage. And so here's some questions in this. What reoccurring arguments or points of tension arise in our marriage? And this could be any interpersonal relationship. How might the enemy be amplifying these issues, right? What lies does Satan whisper to me about my spouse? They don't care about you. They'll never change. You'd be better off alone, all these things. You have to understand, the enemy does not look at your marriage and think, oh, they're Christians, they're good. He's like, oh, I'm going to crush this joint. So you just get these thoughts. What lies might he be whispering to me about my spouse, or to my spouse about me? That's what lies might he be whispering to my spouse about me? This is all from the enemy, right? Because remember Revelation 12:10. The enemy is the accuser of the brethren. So he's whenever you hear accusing thoughts of your spouse or any interpersonal relationship, it's the enemy. It's the enemy, right? It's the enemy. Let me give you another question from Examine How the Enemy Targets Your Marriage. What habits or patterns in our marriage might Satan be using to create distance or resentment? I'm telling you, just sitting down and thinking about, so I'm giving couples are being transformed. This isn't a boast. I'm just saying this because it's just a reality. Couples are being transformed just by using this document because they're thinking about, okay, how does the enemy, and here's what happens. When you start working together against the enemy, he can no longer make your spouse your enemy, or whoever. And then once you start to think like that, how is he tempting me? What things do I tempt? So let me give you, for me personally, this is something I struggle with. Since I was a kid, I've always been like a wild dude, right? I've had my fair share of mischief, as they would say. But one thing that since I was a kid I've always hated is false accusations. I hate false accusations. To this day, as an adult, I hate false accusations. If I'm wrong, I don't have a problem. Like, I'm not at a point in my life, like we grown, we getting older. You know what I'm saying? I'm not at a point in my life where I'm trying to prove I'm right and I sinned against you, but I'm really blaming you because I'm just not even on them type terms. I'm not even in that space. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I want to own it, and I want to ask for forgiveness, and I want to right the wrongs that I did. But if I didn't do it, then I get really tempted when I'm falsely accused. Like I can't stand it. This happens when people like leave the church and they won't really, and they'll say that stuff to people in the church as if like, oh, I was sinning in ways that no one else sees, and it was like, fam, don't lie, just say, then if I show receipts, it's like, come on, fam. Like, so that stuff can really irritate me. So that's a habit or pattern that the enemy used a lot in my marriage. Let me tell you what happened. This is one thing that really hurt my marriage desperately, destroyed it pretty much. There was this thing, right? Like, my ex-wife, she hated conflict. She didn't like to have conflict. I don't like conflict, but I understand that has to happen. Right? I understand that I'm not afraid of it, but I'm not argumentative. I'm not trying to argue a lot. I'm not afraid of it, but if we got to do it, we got to deal with it. And here's how the enemy really uses to really hurt badly our marriage. So if I sense something was wrong, I could pick up like something's wrong. I'd say, hey, is anything wrong? She would say, no, nothing's wrong. She didn't want to have a conflict. But I knew something was wrong. And then I'd say, maybe wait 20 minutes. Is anything wrong? No, nothing's wrong, right? This would go on for maybe a couple of hours. And then eventually she would say, yeah, something's wrong. And I'd be like, what happened? And then she'd say, well, you said you did something. Maybe it was a couple days ago, a week ago, whatever. I would get offended. And here's what happened. I would get offended because, when you're married, you don't want to walk on eggshells, right? You don't want to be worried about, did I do something? No one gets married like, oh, man, I can't wait to be in conflict with them, right? Or any personal relationship. You got a new friend. You don't want to be arguing with your friend. Like, who wants to do that? Like, no one really wants to do that. If you do you have deeper problems, right? So I would get offended because, one, I asked you and you said nothing was wrong. And then two, it's something that I said or did that you could have brought up days ago. So I would get offended. And then, so I got irritated because I thought you're lying to me. And then what she took was, when I bring things up to you, you don't like conflict. You don't like when I bring things up. And I was like, no, I don't mind when you bring, but when you're accusing me of something or I'm asking you if something wrong so we can resolve it, you say no. And then if I don't keep asking, and it created this cycle where in her mind, he doesn't like to be corrected. And in my mind, I don't believe you and the enemy just exploited that. And it was so subtle that it took like 7 years to really be like, what is going on here? Why is this happening? This is what happened. The enemy he exploits it. And he's sitting back eating popcorn, laughing while you're arguing, thinking your spouse is your enemy. And the whole time the enemy is around y'all, trying to tempt you to think. So it's really important to think about what habits or patterns in our marriage and to think that. Step 3, identify subtle strategies, right? How might I be tempted to withhold love, forgiveness, or intimacy as a form of punishment? Keep in mind, 1 Corinthians 7 says that if you separate physically, only do it unless you agreed upon, but come back together because the devil gets a foothold. So newsflash, sexless marriages are satanic. And the devil has gotten a foothold. And when whatever that foothold is, it will lead to other things, right? If you're married, let me tell you this. If you're in any interpersonal relationship, but if your spouse has to earn affection, has to earn the fruits of the Spirit, or has to earn what God commanded you to do, if your spouse has to earn intimacy, has to earn this, the devil's got a foothold in your marriage. I'm sorry. He just got it. Yes, I know it's complicated. Don't get me wrong. I get it. But a lot of the things, when you make your spouse earn what God tells you to freely give, the devil's gotten a foothold in your marriage. He does. That's a Mosaic law marriage. You don't earn, like wives have to earn their husbands being affectionate or cleaning up around the house with okay, we can have sex tonight or whatever. Like, what are you talking about, right? And husbands have to earn having sex. They got to do all this. And it's like, what are we talking about here, right? I know it's complicated, but I'm saying this is how the enemy works. I've watched him do this and destroy marriages, including my own. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. I've seen it wreck marriages, right? Listen, here's another question in step 3, subtle strategies. How do I respond when my spouse confronts me with a mistake or failure? Am I defensive, dismissive, or combative? These are things that you have to think about. And lastly, I'm not going to go through this whole thing because there's a lot, right? There's a whole create the temptation blueprint for your marriage. So this is a question that you could ask. If I wanted to divide us, what unresolved issue would I use as a wedge? Right? That's what you got to do. If you were Satan, how would you specifically attack your marriage to cause division and sin? What unresolved issues would he use? Right? What would he use? How could he manipulate communication patterns? You know, it's funny. People always say, "Oh, almost every time I'm counseling people in a relationship, they always say they have communication problems." And I don't think they know what they mean, because you've been living together, you understand the English language, so you don't have a communication problem in the sense where I don't speak the same language they do. You have a perception problem, right? You have a perception problem. That's really the issue of communication. And you have a body language problem. You'd be shocked how many times you get angry at someone you're talking to if they roll their eyes or take a deep breath or look away. Like they didn't say anything, right? You know why? Most people need body language. Need to have counseling about how you, because your body can't lie. It can, but you have to be trained. That's why the FBI trains agents how to lie or how to beat a polygraph, because your body naturally doesn't. You have to train it to do that. You can say nothing's wrong with your mouth, but your body language will say something different. A lot of times, what couples struggle with is I'm tempted by your body language, and that's what's giving me, and that's what's. And then you get, man, I'm telling you, the enemy just be working. Lastly, to turn the light on. It says what scriptures can we pray and meditate on together to strengthen our bond? Do you know there's some couples? I've had couples that have been married for years, and I say, hey, do you guys ask each other for forgiveness? They're like, no, not really. I said, did you guys ever do that? Well, no, not really. This is, well, how do you guys resolve conflict? You'd be shocked how this happens. So you can think, what habits or boundaries can we put in place to guard our relationships against the enemy's attacks? Things like that. You can create your own document. If you were Satan, how would you tempt you? I have one for just individuals, and then I have one as couples that I've led my church through, still leading them through. As a matter of fact, I have a couples meeting Wednesday night and Thursday night. We're going to talk about some of this, because if you're married and you can remind yourself that you have an enemy that wants to make each other the enemy, you're working together. You're one flesh working together against your flesh, so that you don't sin in those ways. But I just wanted to put this out there. There was some other stuff I want to talk about, but not today. I thought let's do this because this is beneficial, and I think can help a lot of couples. Because this is going to be in the forthcoming book, The 5 Hurt Languages. That might not be the title, but the book on marriage is forthcoming, hopefully by the winter of 2025. Appreciate you. Grace and peace. Like and subscribe. Get at me.